Greetings, Fire Chargers Darkblade here, and in today's fourth installment of Reaction Week, I will be reacting to What Was the Day of the Exodus from Egypt by Got Questions Ministries. Share in case you want to read the original link yourself. The Exodus of the Israel from Egypt is tied to a few possible dates, but none with absolute certainty. History is understood through materials that survive long enough to be documented and remembered in the current era. When the incidents in question stretch back 3,000 or 4,000 years, the evidence one can expect to find is greatly reduced. Those records that survive might be exceedingly accurate, but not include the details one might wish for. This seems to be the case with the Book of Exodus, resulting in debates over when its events might have occurred. Analyzing the nuances of how archaeologists and scholars date ancient events, such as found in the Book of Exodus, is well beyond the scope of a single article or the ability of a typical reader. Records of ancient Egyptian history are especially notorious for being erratic, full of internal contradictions and exaggerations, and overly flattering to whoever was ruling at the time. So, the article does not cite any sources here. Secular Egyptology is the subject of ongoing debates about how and when to date certain milestones. Discussions about interpretation and translation occur within biblical studies. Competing facts and assumptions result in a dizzying array of possibilities. I hope this sentence here was not a reference to David Roll's new chronology, because there is practically no debate about that. From this chaos emerged two dates, consistently seen as the most likely moments for his exodus from Egypt. Okay, now that we've gotten past the intro, these are 1446 BC and 1225 BC, respectively labeled the early and late date. The late date is actually around 1265 BC. Source is Ancient Egypt and the Bible, which is Egyptologist Dr. David A. Falk's YouTube channel, and also there's the Exodus Rediscovered series that he helped produce with Inspiring Philosophy, and I'll get something else. So yeah, there's also Dr. Falk's book, The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context, and you see, what is it called? Visual timeline diagram on page 12, and it clearly shows the late Exodus date at 1265 BC. But I won't get too much into that. Each has biblical, logical, and archaeological support, as well as corresponding weaknesses. Of particular interest is which Egyptian pharaohs correspond to those dates, and whether the archaeological evidence is compatible. The early date, 1446 BC, is the most common date applied in conservative interpretations of Scripture. This takes the statement of 1 Kings 6:1 literally, looking back 480 years from the 4th year of the reign of Solomon in the early to mid 900s BC. A parallel timeline is given in Judges 11:26. Using mainstream dating of Egyptian dynasties, this would place the arrival of Joseph and his family in Egypt, Exodus 1 verses 1 through 7, shortly before the culture was conquered by foreign invaders, only to be returned to ethnic Egyptian rule centuries later. This view would ascribe the murder of infants, Exodus 1:16 to 21, to either Amenhotep I or Tutmosis I. whose reputations align with such cruelty. Let me actually see when Tutmosis the First was. So we are going to pharaoh.se. Go to pharaohs and scroll down to 18th dynasty. I scrolled too far. So the date range we're looking at is Amenhotep the First. Yep, Amenhotep the First checks out. That is accurate. So far, not bad. Not egregiously bad. It would also connect to Tutmosis the first daughter, Hatshepsut, a female co-regent. Well, she wasn't co-regent with Tutmosis the First. She was kind of co-regent, but also the de facto person in charge for about the first 20 or so years of Tutmosis III, who then finally gets in control of his own after Hatshepsut dies. Okay, this appears to have unscrolled me, or maybe I did that. I don't remember. Whose reputations align with such... Okay, let me go back. This view would ascribe the murder of infants to either Amenhotep I or Tutmosis I, whose reputations align with such cruelty. Citation needed. His stepson worked to counter her legacy. Amenhotep II, the seventh pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Okay, the ordinal position checks out. Notably suffered a lack of military campaigns beginning in 1446 BC. Okay, that date does not check out. Amenhotep II was not reigning in did not have a halt to military campaigns in 1446 BC. He was not reigning in 1446 BC, and in fact 1446 BC is before he was even born. There's one Egyptian inscription, I don't remember what it's called, but it says that he became pharaoh at age 18. And as you can see here, he ascended at 1425 BC. That would make his birth what was it? During at 1443 BC. He was born in 1443 BC, which is after 1446 BC. So that's a problem there. And even if you go with, well, the pharaoh.se thing isn't right, well, we still know that, what is it called? Amenhotep II could not possibly have been reigning in 1446 BC because this guy, Amenhotep III, has a synchronism with a certain Babylonian king that in one of the Amarna letters, who has another synchronism with Tutankhamun. And this Babylonian king ascended around 1359-1360 BC. So Amenhotep III, who reigned 38 years, must have died no earlier than 1360 BC. That means he ascended no earlier than 1398 BC, which means his predecessor Tutmosis IV, who reigned about a decade, ascended no earlier than about 1409 BC, around then, or maybe 1410, which means that his predecessor, Amenhotep II, in question, who reigned 26 years, ascended no earlier than 1436 BC. So yeah, which is a decade after. So Amenhotep II in 1446 BC, that combination is simply impossible. Dr. Falk gets into more of this. And his heir Tutmosis IV was criticized for being a less than legitimate successor, citation not provided. Contemporary archaeological records such as the Amarna letters indicate that a major description in Canaan blamed on a people referred to as the Apiru or Hapiru. The Amarna letters are not contemporary to Amenhotep II. They date far later, about 1355 to 1330 BC, so around that third quarter of the 14th century BC. Basically, late Amenhotep III, and then there's through Akhenaten and early Tutankhamun. So that's about at least 50 years after when the early date conquest should have begun. So the Israelites are already settled in here, and we have reports that people are invading. Discoveries also include evidence of cities such as Jericho being conquered during that time frame. Citation needed. From what we currently know, the destruction layers for Jericho correspond to 1550 BC as demonstrated by Captain Kenyon, and there was a transition from Jericho's settlement in around 1200, the late Bronze to the early Iron One, as indicated by the latest reports from Nigro. Got this from Exodus Rediscovered. All this contributes to the assumption that 1446 BC is the most likely date of the exodus from Egypt. The late date of 1225 BC, okay, 1265, but whatever, also has proponents and a set of supporting evidence. The name Ramesses is used as a city in the book of Exodus, and this is the name of several rulers from the 1300s and 1200s BC. Archaeological evidence in Canaan is that suggests widespread carnage in that general time period. Well, still, citation not provided. Other supportive discoveries, such as a hastily abandoned slave town of Avaris containing mass infant graves, and Egyptian records detailing an era of chaos and disaster. No citations are provided so far. The closest that we get are Bible verses that sound like parallels to what is being described here, are typically dated to this later period. Well, the abandonment of Avaris was later, it was midway through Ramses II, and accepting the 1225 BC date, whatever, would mean interpreting the 480 years of 1 Kings 6:1 in the time frame of Judges 11:26. Well, it's not a time frame of Judges 11:26. It's a time frame provided by the internal character or figure. The person speaking is providing this time frame. The biblical text itself does not say that he's right or of Judges, as either non-literal or needing further clarification. Other possibilities still exist. Some scholars of ancient Egypt suggest them as mainstream timelines used today may need further adjustment, depending on how one approaches the issue. The objective dates of events recorded in ancient Egyptian records could shift as much as several centuries just now. This has led to pharaohs such as Neferhotep I and the pop culture icon King Tut being put forward as potential rulers during the Exodus, like more mainstream early and late dates of 1446 BC and 1225 BC again. These alternate dates are presented with archaeological evidence that could be compatible with scripture. In short, we could not say for certain when the events of the book of Exodus occurred. A straightforward reading of the Bible. Oh, keep in mind that this city of Ramses that's mentioned here was a new creation of the 19th dynasty around 1300 BC. But prior to that, it did not exist whatsoever. And again, my citation is Dr. Falk. I could probably find some and a more specific citation for you if I had done more research before making this video. Anyway, a straightforward reading of the Bible combined with some archaeological evidence leads to a date of 1446 BC. A less literal view of certain dates in the Old Testament combined with fairly substantial extra biblical evidence would suggest a date around 1225 BC. More outside the box thinking allows other archaeological and biblical evidence to coordinate the dates sometimes in between. Despite the ambiguity, there is ample evidence to suggest the events of Exodus are plausible. I agree. The complication in case is not determining if Israel was freed from Egypt, but precisely when. And there's also a question of who, and certain when-who combinations, like 1446 BC and Amenhotep II, are just impossible. So that was all that this article has to offer. And that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow.